I was 19 years old and I answered an ad in the paper looking for presenter writers, and it was on the strength of my writing because I was the world's worst presenter. But as a writer, I think I was okay. And at that stage, What Now used to do a lot more comedy sketches. And so even when I proved not so good at the presenting, I continued to write for them on an ad hoc basis, doing comedy for kids, which was fun. It came to an end, and then after an end, I spent a great deal of time being recognised for several years after. And that wasn't so good, because it was, people would ask, what are you doing now? And I'd say, oh gosh, nothing. I was a Shortland Street storyliner at the time. And I was just learning what Shortland Street was about, and at that point, the philosophy of the show was that each of our stories had to be about characters who learned something. And whatever story arc that they were going through is that they had to come through and learn something and be different people by the end. And the genesis of the story was that I thought, I wonder how you could write a story where the only people who learned anything were the audience. That your characters start in one place, they go through a huge story, but they come out of it not really knowing any better than what they did, but the audience has got a huge insight into these characters. What I didn't realize is that I was writing a mystery, and even though it had themes of child abuse and broken apart families, that at the end of the day, it was a mystery about what happened to these characters, and I never actually realized that until I saw it on screen. I, at one point, delivered my finished script to a director, and it became hers, and it became everyone in that production teams. And I suddenly had nothing to do with it. I think I went to visit set once. And also then Nikki described to me her vision for it, and she said, I want to take it into a very bleak, almost 1970s style of shooting. Which, surprised, I hadn't even thought about how is it going to be shot. So it was a revelation again to watch it, and what she found visually told a story in ways that I had never ever seen on that printed page. It was very exciting. Well, I did the training ground through the training course through South Pacific Pictures, which was a 3-month intensive course, and it was fantastic. It was, the writing section of it was run by Lois Booton, who was one of the original writers of Shortland Street. And she did a really intense writing 101 for soap opera, which was fantastic, because it is such a different genre to anything else that you're likely to write. Writing storylines in terms of writing character-based story is such a discipline in itself. But working with other people is such a skill as well. And I think it's one of the things about being a storyliner is that you almost lose your ego, because you learn that you don't just have ideas, everyone has ideas, and that your idea belongs to the entire group. And sometimes something you might have that's half-baked will be picked up by someone else and turned into gold. And vice versa. Somebody might be struggling with an idea and you'll sort of go, yeah, but what if we did this and this and this? So it's a very structured week that the storyliners have. They'll spend the first 2 weeks talking, our first 2 days talking broad strokes of stories. What do we need to do this week? What do we want to do? How is this advancing our characters? Is it taking us towards where our forward planning has us, and where we know the characters are going to head for? And are the stories relevant and pertinent for this week that we're telling? You'll talk in broad strokes, and then over the next 3 days, you'll beat those broad strokes out into separate scenes, separate story beats, structure them into episodes, and your storyliners will go away and write those up into individual episodes, which then go to dialogue writers. Dialogue writers will then take those storylines and turn them into the dialogue that you see on the television. It's very easy to say a discussion between Rachel and Chris over the price of coffees at the cafeteria explodes to the point where they decide to call their relationship quits. But getting that transition in a scene, and especially a scene which is going to last anything from 50 seconds to 2 minutes, is an absolute skill of a dialogue writer. I'm in charge of every creative decision that's made on the show, and that's not to say that I make every creative decision on the show, but they have my stamp of approval, or I have the trust of the very good team who are working with me. I'm very lucky to have a fantastic line producer in Liz Adams, who looks after all the nuts and bolts of the running of the studios, the cameras, the day-to-day staffing. But in terms of what is the tone of a show, what is the philosophy of a show, that's over to me. And it encompasses everything from the writing, the scripting, the casting, through to its decisions daily, such as should this be red or should this be blue. And usually I'll try and throw that back to the people who are in charge of those departments, saying, well, what do you think, red or blue? And if I have a huge reason why that should be one or the other, I'll have to be able to explain why I think that. Because I think it's not a job where you should be megalomaniacal. It's certainly one where you're working collaboratively, especially on a show like Shortland Street. And you've got to have the trust and faith in everyone to share your vision. But part of that is about leading and communicating your vision well. Once we're going 20 years, the thing that keeps it fresh and keeps it exciting is that every week is a different creative challenge. It's very seldom is the week where we're doing, okay, there's 80 scenes in the studio, there's 12 scenes on location, and they're just walk and talks. Quite often we will have something that will stretch the limits of the art department, the wardrobe department, makeup, whoever, directors. And that's sort of what keeps it exciting, and that's also part of the show renewing itself, is that it does keep throwing up new creative challenges, and that makes sure that everyone is always on the top of their game. And I think that once you get complacent, because certainly a show that goes on so long, you can want to try and sit in your job forever. But I think one of the things that I'm really quite pleased about the current team that we've got, and certainly the people who I've worked closely with, is that they've all considered what they do an art. They all consider themselves artists, so that when they do feel that they are getting creatively stifled by the show, i.e. they've been there maybe too long, that they move on. And as they should. They move on to other shows, bigger, possibly brighter. And Shortland Street encourages that. Part of the remit of South Pacific Pictures in Shortland Street is that it's always been a training ground to put people into the industry. The very first 1 hour of Shortland Street that we did, which was, I can't even remember the year, but I was working there as a storyliner. And it was the storyline in which Mackenzie Choate blew up the hospital after a battle with Oscar Henry, who had been lying in a bed for 3 weeks pretending he was in a coma, and only in his final scenes did you realize he'd been listening all along after he wrote the initials MC in his custard to indicate who the person was who tried to murder him. At the same time, Nick Harrison was doing a countdown. It was 1999, because Nick Harrison was doing a countdown on his computer to prove that there was no millennium bug. And just as he got to 0, the clinic exploded. And we then went from there into action and adventure when there was a fire in the clinic and Rachel McKenna got trapped under a burning part of wall, and Frank Malone had to take his shirt off to douse it in water to rescue her. And it was then that I kind of sat there, and it was exciting and thrilling to write. And it was so much fun working on that with my fellow writers and seeing the end product. Actually, I believe it was directed by Wayne Terrell, who's directing our 20th birthday special this year round. And seeing what came out of it was my first realization of, wow, this is so much bigger than the soap. There are so many possibilities of things that you can do here. It's certainly a show that needs to move with the times. I think we've been moving with the times up till now. I know that I personally felt a sense with 20 years coming up that we had to do something spectacular. And that's currently what we're working on, and I think that we're delivering it in spades. And there's part of me which is sitting there going, oh my God, what do they do next? And I hope to God that they don't want to celebrate the 21st birthday, because how can you do it all again in a year? But the show will have to keep going in that way, and will have to find a way of reinventing itself. I don't think that necessarily what is considered spectacular needs to be, we don't need more bangs and crashes, and although we are going for big bangs and crashes this time round, what we've also got underpinning it is a huge emotional stories, and those emotional stories that we're currently telling will head all the way through to Christmas. So now when we're discussing our Christmas episodes and what's going on in our Christmas weeks, we're looking at saying, rather than doing a huge, as we did for the 20th birthday, why don't we look at doing something so emotionally resounding that it shakes your audience up just as much. And I think as long as whoever is in charge of a show and whoever is writing the show looks after the emotional content of it, while keeping abreast of changes in television, changes in medicine, changes in viewers' viewing habits, that it will, but keeping a firm eye on characters and modern thinking, that the show will prevail. I hope it would.